Imagine owning an apartment building in New York City. You've dealt with rent control, sky-high property taxes, and endless regulations for years. Now you want to sell and get out. But here's what they don't tell you. Under a new law, you can't just sell your property. You have to offer it to a nonprofit first. They get 120 days to decide. Then you can list it on the open market. But wait, there's more. Even after you get an offer, the city has to approve it. What the actual hell? This isn't some dystopian future. This is happening right now in New York City under the new administration. And the implications? They're about to reshape one of the world's most important real estate markets in ways that absolutely nobody is prepared for. I'm going to show you exactly what this means for landlords, renters, investors, and anyone thinking about moving to or fleeing from New York City. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll understand why this single law might trigger the largest real estate exodus in American history. But first, let me tell you what actually happened. The law explained. In the first week of January 2025, as part of a sweeping housing initiative, New York City implemented what they're calling the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. Sounds nice, right? Community opportunity. Who could be against that? Here's what it actually means. If you own a multifamily property, anything with 3 or more units, and you want to sell it, you must first offer it to qualified nonprofit organizations. These nonprofits, which are supposedly focused on affordable housing, get exclusive negotiating rights for up to 120 days. 4 months. During this time, you cannot market your property. You cannot seek other buyers. You sit and wait while a nonprofit decides whether they want your building at whatever price they determine is fair. If the nonprofit passes or can't secure financing, then you can list your property on the open market. But even after you find a buyer and negotiate a price, that's not the end. The city's housing department must approve the sale. They can reject it if they believe the buyer's plans don't align with the city's housing goals. Let me repeat that because it's insane. The government can veto your private real estate transaction. Now, the city says this is about preserving affordable housing. They claim that too many buildings are being bought by developers who flip them into luxury units, displacing long-term residents. And look, that's a real concern. But here's the question nobody's asking. At what point does regulation become confiscation? The immediate impact. Within 72 hours of this law taking effect, something unprecedented happened. Real estate attorneys across Manhattan received over 2,000 calls from landlords asking the same question. How do I get out? Here's the data that should terrify you. In the first week alone, multifamily property listings dropped by 67%. Not because owners don't want to sell. They're desperate to sell. But they're pulling their properties off the market because they'd rather hold than deal with this nightmare process. One landlord I spoke with owns a 6-unit building in Brooklyn, told me he's been trying to retire for 3 years. He's 68 years old. Under the new law, he offered his building to 3 different nonprofits. None of them had the capital to buy it. 4 months later, he listed it publicly. Got an offer within 2 weeks. Then the city rejected the sale because the buyer planned to do, and I quote, substantial renovations that might temporarily displace residents. He's still stuck with the building, still paying the property taxes, still dealing with tenant complaints. And now he's exploring something darker, intentional neglect. If he lets the building deteriorate enough, maybe he can eventually abandon it and walk away. This is what happens when you trap people in assets they can't liquidate. But here's where it gets really interesting. The landlord dilemma. Let's talk about something nobody wants to admit. Not all landlords are evil corporations. Many are middle-class families who bought a 2 or 3 family building as their retirement plan. These aren't billionaires. They're teachers, nurses, small business owners who scraped together a down payment 20 or 30 years ago. Now they're trapped. Because here's what the law doesn't account for. Nonprofits don't have money. The city expects these organizations to buy buildings at market rate, but they're nonprofits. They survive on grants and donations. Even if they want to buy your building, they often can't secure financing. Banks look at their balance sheets and say no. So what actually happens? The 120-day waiting period becomes a 120-day prison sentence. You're paying property taxes, insurance, maintenance, dealing with tenant issues, and you cannot sell. You're burning money while you wait for an organization that will never buy your property. And God forbid you have an emergency. Need to pay for medical care? Want to relocate for a family situation? Too bad. Your wealth is locked in a building you're not allowed to sell. Now, some of you are thinking, good, these landlords have been exploiting tenants for decades. And look, some have. But let's play this out. If landlords can't exit the market, what happens? They stop investing in their properties. Why would you renovate a building you can't sell? Why would you upgrade the plumbing, fix the roof, or modernize the units when you're trapped in an asset with no exit strategy? This leads to deterioration, which leads to tenant complaints, which leads to code violations, which leads to even more difficulty selling the property. It's a death spiral. And here's the darkest part. Some landlords are now looking at intentional abandonment. They stop paying property taxes, stop maintaining the building, and eventually let the city take it through tax foreclosure. They walk away from their equity, the building falls into disrepair, and tenants end up in even worse conditions. This law was supposed to protect tenants, but it might be creating the conditions for the worst tenant outcomes imaginable. Why you should absolutely leave NYC? Let's be brutally honest. If you're a property owner in New York City right now, you should be terrified. This law sets a precedent that your property rights are conditional. The government can, at any time, decide that your ability to sell your own asset is subject to their approval. Here's why you should leave. Property rights are no longer absolute. If the city can mandate a 120-day nonprofit review period for multifamily buildings, what's next? Single-family homes? Co-ops? Commercial real estate? Once you establish the principle that the government can insert itself into private transactions, there's no logical stopping point. Your wealth is trapped. Real estate is supposed to be a liquid asset. You buy property, it appreciates. You sell when you need the capital. But now, if you own a multifamily building in NYC, your wealth is locked. You cannot access it on your timeline. You are at the mercy of a bureaucratic process that has no incentive to move quickly. The tax burden is crushing. New York City already has some of the highest property taxes in the country. Now imagine paying those taxes while being unable to sell. You're paying the government for the privilege of being trapped in an asset the government won't let you liquidate. It's financial torture. The exodus has already begun. Smart money is leaving. In the past week, Florida real estate agents have reported a 34% increase in inquiries from New York-based investors. Texas is seeing similar numbers. These aren't coincidences. Investors are reading the writing on the wall. And here's what nobody's saying. If landlords flee, the rental market collapses. Who's going to own these buildings? Who's going to maintain them? The nonprofits don't have the money. The city doesn't have the capacity. You're going to see a wave of abandoned properties, deteriorating neighborhoods, and a rental crisis that makes the current situation look like paradise. If you're a landlord, an investor, or anyone with significant real estate holdings in New York City, the message is clear. Get out while you still can. But wait, let me show you the other side of this story. Why you should absolutely stay in NYC. Now let me tell you why this might be the greatest opportunity of your lifetime. Because here's what the panicking landlords don't understand. This law is going to create the most distorted real estate market in American history. And distorted markets create opportunities. Think about what's really happening. Thousands of landlords are going to panic and try to exit. They're going to accept below-market offers just to get out. Some will abandon properties entirely. This is going to create a once-in-a-generation buying opportunity for anyone who understands how to navigate the system. Here's the play. If you're a sophisticated investor or you can partner with a nonprofit, you're going to be able to acquire buildings at massive discounts. The law doesn't prevent you from buying. It just adds friction to the process. Friction that desperate sellers will pay you to navigate. And here's the secret nobody's talking about. The nonprofits are going to partner with private investors. They don't have the capital to buy buildings themselves, but they can be the acquisition vehicle. You structure a deal where the nonprofit buys the building during the 120-day window, then immediately partners with or sells to a private investor. Everyone gets what they want. The nonprofit gets its commission or fee, You get the building at a discount, and the city gets to claim they're preserving affordable housing. It's a workaround that's 100% legal and absolutely happening right now. But there's an even bigger opportunity. As landlords flee and the rental supply contracts, rents are going to explode. This is basic economics. If you own rental properties in New York City and you can weather the regulatory storm, you're going to be able to charge whatever you want. The demand isn't going anywhere. People still need places to live. But the supply is about to crater. And here's the nuclear option that nobody wants to admit. This law is probably unconstitutional. It's almost certainly a violation of the Takings Clause of the Fifth Amendment. Some legal expert somewhere is going to challenge this, and there's a good chance the courts strike it down. If you can survive the next 12 to 24 months, you might wake up one day to find the law invalidated and your property rights restored. That's the contrarian bet. Stay in New York, acquire distressed properties, wait out the legal challenges, and become phenomenally wealthy when sanity returns. Now, let me show you what this means for everyone else. Section 7. What happens to rents? Let's talk about what absolutely nobody in city government wants to discuss. This law is about to cause rents to skyrocket. Here's why. When landlords can't sell, they can't exit. When they can't exit, they need to maximize revenue from the properties they're trapped in. The only lever they have is rent increases. And while New York has rent stabilization laws for some units, many buildings have market-rate apartments where landlords can raise rents to whatever the market will bear. So what happens? Landlords jack up rents on market-rate units to compensate for being trapped in a depreciating asset they can't liquidate. Renters who were barely affording their apartments now face 20%, 30%, even 40% increases. But here's where it gets truly perverse. The nonprofits that are supposed to buy these buildings and preserve affordable housing, they don't have the money. So the buildings don't get bought. The landlords stay trapped. The rents keep rising. And the very people this law was designed to protect end up paying more. And it gets worse. As rents rise and landlords flee, the quality of rental housing declines. Maintenance gets deferred. Repairs don't happen. Buildings deteriorate. Tenants are paying more for worse conditions. But wait, there's another layer. Some landlords are going to respond to this law by converting their buildings. If you can't sell a multifamily property, maybe you can convert it to condos and sell the individual units. Or convert to commercial use if the zoning allows. The law creates an incentive to remove rental housing from the market entirely. This means fewer rental units, higher rents, and a housing crisis that spirals out of control. And here's the question everyone should be asking. Who benefits from this? Conspiracy theory that might be true. The retail catastrophe. But let's talk about something even more insidious that absolutely nobody is discussing. What this does to retail real estate. The law specifically targets multifamily residential buildings. But here's what happens. Many mixed-use buildings in New York have apartments above and retail storefronts below. Under the new law, if you want to sell one of these buildings, you're subject to the nonprofit review process. Now imagine you own a building with a bodega on the ground floor and 4 apartments upstairs. You want to sell. You offer it to nonprofits. They're not interested in running a bodega, so they pass. You list it publicly. You find a buyer. But now, the city has to approve the sale. They look at the buyer's plans and see they want to replace the bodega with a Starbucks, or a bank, or a high-end boutique. The city says no. They want to preserve neighborhood character. They want to protect small businesses. They reject the sale. So what do? You're stuck with a building you can't sell, a bodega that barely covers its rent, and no way out. This is going to devastate retail corridors across the city. Building owners are going to stop renting to small businesses because they make the property harder to sell. They're going to leave storefronts vacant rather than risk being trapped with a tenant the city wants to protect. Within 6 months, you're going to see blocks of empty storefronts. Not because there's no demand, but because the regulatory risk is too high. And here's the truly insane part. The city thinks they're protecting small businesses, but they're actually creating the conditions for their extinction. The legal question, Section 9. Is this even legal? Let's address the elephant in the room. Is this law even constitutional? The Fifth Amendment says the government cannot take private property without just compensation. Courts have interpreted this to mean that if a regulation goes too far, it becomes an unconstitutional taking. So the question is, does forcing you to offer your property to a nonprofit, wait 120 days, then get city approval to sell constitute a taking? The city would argue no. You still own the property. You can still use it. You just have to follow a process to sell it. It's a regulation, not a seizure. But here's the counter-argument. If the government makes your property so difficult to sell that you effectively cannot access your equity, haven't they taken your property in all but name? If you need to sell because of financial hardship, medical emergency, or retirement, and the law prevents you from doing so, hasn't the government deprived you of your property rights? This is going to end up in court. It has to. And there's a good chance the Supreme Court, which has been increasingly protective of property rights, strikes this down. But here's the problem. Even if the law is eventually invalidated, the damage is done. Landlords have already fled. Properties have already been abandoned. The rental market has already collapsed. You can't unring that bell. And in the meantime, thousands of property owners are trapped in a legal limbo, unable to sell, unable to access their wealth, and at the mercy of a bureaucracy that has no incentive to move quickly. The end game. So here's what I think is really happening. And this is the part that should terrify everyone, whether you own property or not. This law isn't really about affordable housing. It's about the city acquiring property. Think about it. If landlords can't sell their buildings through normal channels, and they eventually abandon them due to tax burden and maintenance costs, who gets the properties? The city does, through tax foreclosure. The city then sells or transfers these properties to nonprofits at below-market rates. The nonprofits operate them as affordable housing, subsidized by taxpayers. And the original owners? They lose everything. It's effectively a mechanism for the government to acquire private property without having to pay market value. You force owners into a position where they cannot sell and cannot maintain, they eventually abandon, and you seize the property for pennies on the dollar. If this sounds dystopian, it's because it is. And here's the kicker. If this law survives legal challenges and proves successful in New York, other cities will copy it. Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston. Every city with a housing crisis and a progressive government will look at this and say, why not us? Within 5 years, you could see this model replicated across the country. Property rights as we understand them could fundamentally change. So here's my question for you, and I want you to answer in the comments. Is this the future of American property ownership? Should the government have the power to restrict how and when you can sell your own property? Or is this an unconstitutional overreach that needs to be stopped? And more importantly, if you own property in New York right now, what are you going to do? Are you getting out? Are you staying and fighting? Are you looking for loopholes? Let me know in the comments. And if you think this video should be seen by every property owner in America, share it. Because this is the conversation nobody in power wants us to have. But we're having it anyway.